For 10,000 years, navies had been bound to the surface, forced to come up for air. The greatest warships on Earth were prisoners of the boundary between water and sky, their power ultimately chained to the oxygen their engines and their crews required to breathe. The submarine, the apex predator of two world wars, was no different. It was not a true submersible. It was merely a surface ship that could temporarily and briefly hide beneath the waves. For a few hours, it could be a ghost. But then, inevitably, the batteries would run low and the air would grow stale. It would have to surface vulnerable and exposed to recharge and refuel, a hunter forced to become the hunted. This was the fundamental limitation of naval warfare, a rule as old as the first hollowed-out log. But in 1955, a single-coded message declared that era, and all of naval history, obsolete. The message was simple: underway on nuclear power. The vessel that sent it was the USS Nautilus. The USS Nautilus was more than just the first nuclear submarine. It was a quantum leap in technology that redefined stealth, strategy, and underwater warfare, proving that one vessel could render an entire global paradigm of naval power obsolete overnight. This is the story of the atomic shark that conquered the final frontier on Earth, the impossible machine built by a tyrant's will, and how it dragged the world, kicking and screaming, into the terrifying new age of nuclear warfare. Chapter 1: The Tyrant's Vision. The aftermath of World War II left the world's navies in a state of flux. The aircraft carrier had dethroned the battleship as the king of the sea, and the German U-boat wolfpacks had proven that a technologically advanced submarine force could nearly bring a global superpower like Great Britain to its knees. The United States Navy, now the undisputed master of the world's oceans, looked at the lessons of the Battle of the Atlantic with a cold, calculating eye. They understood the power of the submarine, but they also understood its profound weakness. The most advanced American submarines of the late 1940s, the Guppy-class boats, were marvels of diesel-electric engineering. They were faster, quieter, and could stay submerged longer than their wartime predecessors. But they were still slaves to their batteries. When submerged, they ran on electric motors powered by enormous lead-acid batteries. At top speed, these batteries could be drained in less than an hour. To recharge them, the submarine had to run its massive diesel engines, which meant it either had to surface completely or use a snorkel, a breathing tube that poked above the waves, making the sub detectable by radar. In the emerging age of anti-submarine warfare, with patrol aircraft and sophisticated radar systems, a snorkeling or surface submarine was a dead submarine. The dream, the holy grail of submarine design since the very beginning, was a vessel that could generate its own power and its own air without needing the surface. A true submersible that could disappear beneath the waves and stay there not for hours or days, but for weeks, months, or even years. A ship that could travel at high speed, submerged, indefinitely. In the late 1940s, this was pure science fiction, the stuff of Jules Verne's novels. It was an engineering impossibility. And then along came a man who specialized in making the impossible a reality, usually by shouting at it until it surrendered. That man was Captain, later Admiral, Hyman G. Rickover. To say Rickover was a difficult man is a profound understatement. He was brilliant, abrasive, profane, and possessed a fanatical, almost terrifying devotion to engineering excellence. He was a small man who cast an enormous, intimidating shadow over everyone he worked with. He suffered no fools, tolerated no excuses, and held his subordinates, and especially his superiors, to impossibly high standards. He was a tyrant, a micromanager, and a bureaucratic brawler of legendary skill. And he was, without question, the only man on Earth who could have built the nuclear navy. Rickover had seen the awesome, world-altering power of the atom unleashed at the end of World War II. While others saw a city-destroying weapon, Rickover, the consummate engineer, saw a power source. He understood that a controlled nuclear reaction released a tremendous amount of heat without consuming any oxygen. That heat could boil water into steam, that steam could turn turbines, and those turbines could both generate electricity and turn a propeller. A nuclear reactor was, in essence, a fire that never needed air and never went out. If you could build one small enough and safe enough to fit inside the cramped confines of a submarine hull, you would shatter every existing limitation of naval warfare. The opposition was immense. Admirals scoffed at the idea, arguing the risks were too great and the costs astronomical. Scientists questioned whether a reactor could be made small and durable enough to withstand the rigors of combat at sea. Bureaucrats threw up mountains of red tape. Rickover fought them all. He used his political cunning to play factions of the Navy, Congress, and the Atomic Energy Commission against each other. He built a dual command structure, heading up the Navy's nuclear power branch and the AEC's Naval Reactor Division, that gave him unprecedented autonomy. He was accountable to everyone, and therefore, in practice, to no one. He was building his own private, high-tech empire with a single, obsessive goal: to forge an atomic heart for a new kind of warship. Chapter 2: Forging the Atomic Heart. The challenge was monumental. A land-based nuclear reactor in the early 1950s was a sprawling complex of concrete and steel. Rickover's team had to shrink all of that technology down to fit inside a teardrop-shaped steel hull, just over 300 feet long and 28 feet wide. And they had to make it perfectly safe. A meltdown in a submarine, hundreds of feet beneath the surface, was a catastrophe almost too horrific to contemplate. There could be no margin for error. Rickover's methods were as unconventional as they were effective. He personally interviewed every single officer being considered for the nuclear submarine program. These interviews were legendary and terrifying crucibles of stress. He would lock candidates in a small room, grill them for hours on arcane subjects from physics to literature, and tear apart their every answer, searching for any sign of intellectual weakness or character flaw. He once asked a young officer what he had read in the past year. The officer listed several books. Rickover asked which one he liked least. The officer named a book. Rickover then spent the next hour berating him for wasting his time on a book he didn't enjoy. The point wasn't the answer. It was to see how the man performed under extreme, irrational pressure. He believed that the men operating his reactors needed to be more than just smart. They needed to be unflappable, intellectually honest, and fanatically disciplined. He was building a priesthood of nuclear operators, and he was their unforgiving god. The design chosen was the Submarine Thermal Reactor, later designated the S2W, S for Submarine, 2 for the second generation of core design, and W for the manufacturer, Westinghouse. It was a pressurized water reactor. In simple terms, the intense heat from the uranium core heated a closed loop of highly pressurized water. This water, kept under such high pressure that it couldn't boil, then flowed through a heat exchanger, essentially a massive radiator. This radiator sat in a second loop of water, which was at a lower pressure. The heat from the first loop instantly flashed this second loop of water into high-pressure steam. This steam then drove the turbines that propelled the submarine. It was a remarkably elegant and, crucially, a very stable and safe design. While the ship itself was being designed at Electric Boat Shipyard in Groton, Connecticut, a full-scale prototype of the entire propulsion system was being built in the middle of the Idaho desert at the National Reactor Testing Station. Designated the S1W, this was a complete submarine engine room and reactor compartment built inside a section of a submarine hull, landlocked hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. They called it Nautilus ashore. Here, Rickover's hand-picked team of engineers and sailors could test every valve, every pump, and every emergency procedure. They'd pushed the reactor to its limits, simulating combat damage and equipment failures, trying to make it fail. On May 31, 1953, the S1W reactor achieved full power, running for 48 hours straight, simulating a submerged crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. The atomic heart was alive and beating strong. The dream was no longer science fiction. Back in Groton on June 14, 1952, President Harry S. Truman had presided over the keel-laying ceremony for the submarine itself, designated SSN 571. The name was chosen to honor both Jules Verne's fictional submarine and the several previous American naval vessels that had borne the name. For the next year and a half, the workers at Electric Boat raced to assemble the revolutionary ship. On January 21, 1954, a massive crowd gathered on the banks of the Thames River in Connecticut. First Lady Mamie Eisenhower smashed a bottle of champagne across the ship's bow, and the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered vessel, slid gracefully into the water. But its most historic moment was yet to come. It would be another full year before its nuclear heart was installed, fueled, and ready for its first test. Chapter 3. Underway on Nuclear Power. January 17, 1955. The USS Nautilus sat moored at the pier in Groton, steam pluming from its turbines in the cold winter air. On the bridge was its first commanding officer, Commander Eugene Dennis Wilkinson, a brilliant and steady officer who had survived Rickover's brutal interview process. For days, the crew had been running through checklists, testing systems, and preparing for this moment. The S2W reactor had been taken critical, achieving a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction 2 weeks prior. Now it was time to go to sea. At 1100 hours, Commander Wilkinson gave the order to cast off all lines. Slowly, silently, the sleek black hull pulled away from the dock. There was no roar of diesel engines, no plume of exhaust smoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the steam turbines and the churning of the twin propellers. As the submarine moved out into the Thames River under its own power, Wilkinson picked up a microphone and sent a message that would echo through history. Underway on nuclear power. The message itself was a statement of revolution. For the first time in history, a vessel was moving without burning a single drop of fossil fuel, without consuming a single molecule of oxygen. It was propelled by the power locked inside the atom. The early sea trials were stunning. The Nautilus immediately began to shatter every record in the book. In May of 1955, it undertook its first long-distance voyage, a shakedown cruise from New London, Connecticut to San Juan, Puerto Rico. The entire 1,381-mile trip was conducted submerged. The submarine maintained an average speed of over 15 knots, a speed previously unheard of for a submarine over such a distance. They arrived in San Juan faster than any submarine had ever made the journey. The old diesel-electric boats would have had to surface and snorkel multiple times, drastically slowing them down. Nautilus did it in one continuous, high-speed underwater sprint. This was the quantum leap. Anti-submarine warfare at the time was based on a simple premise: find the submarine when it has to surface or snorkel to recharge its batteries. The hunter-killer groups of destroyers and aircraft were designed to pounce on these moments of vulnerability. But Nautilus was never vulnerable. It could, in theory, outrun the destroyers hunting it while remaining completely submerged and invisible. It didn't need to surface. It could simply dive deep, accelerate to its top speed of over 23 knots, and disappear into the abyss. It made a mockery of existing naval tactics. It was like trying to hunt a cheetah with a horse and buggy. The game had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. Life aboard this new breed of ship was also alien and strange. Because the reactor produced virtually unlimited power, a side benefit was the ability to produce unlimited fresh water and oxygen. The Nautilus could desalinate seawater and separate oxygen from it through electrolysis. The air was actually cleaner and more breathable than the smoggy air of the cities they had left behind. They had ice cream machines, air conditioning, and a jukebox, but it was a life lived in a steel tube, without sunlight or any sense of day or night. The crew operated on an 18-hour cycle, 6 hours on watch, 12 hours off, to keep them sharp. The psychological strain of living for weeks on end, sealed away from the natural world, was a new challenge that the Navy had to understand and overcome. This was the price of living in the future. Chapter 4. The Roof of the World. As Nautilus was proving its revolutionary capabilities, the Cold War was entering its most dangerous phase. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a tense global standoff, a battle for technological and ideological supremacy. Every achievement, from the Olympics to the space race, was a proxy battle in this conflict. One of the last great unconquered frontiers on Earth was the Arctic Ocean. Lying between the two superpowers, the ice-choked waters of the North Pole were a strategic no-man's land. The shortest flight path for nuclear bombers and missiles between the USSR and the USA was directly over the pole. If a submarine could navigate and operate under the polar ice cap, it would be a strategic game-changer of immense proportions. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a shrewd military strategist, saw the potential immediately. A successful submerged transit of the North Pole would not only open a new, stealthy route for American submarines, but would also be an incredible propaganda victory. It would be the underwater equivalent of the Wright brothers' flight at Kitty Hawk or Lindbergh's crossing of the Atlantic. It would be a bold, undeniable demonstration of American technological superiority. The top-secret mission was codenamed Operation Sunshine. The command of Nautilus for this historic attempt was given to Commander William R. Anderson, a determined and resourceful submariner. The challenges were unlike anything any sailor had ever faced. Standard magnetic compasses were useless so close to the Earth's magnetic pole, spinning wildly and offering no sense of direction. The ship was fitted with a new, experimental piece of technology called an inertial navigation system, which used a complex array of gyroscopes and accelerometers to track the ship's position without any external references. It was brilliant, but it was also prone to drifting over time. A small error at the beginning of the journey could translate into being dozens of miles off course by the time they reached the pole. The greatest danger, however, lay above them. The Arctic ice pack is not a smooth, flat sheet. It is a chaotic, dynamic landscape of underwater mountains of ice called pressure ridges or keels that can jut down hundreds of feet from the surface. A submarine colliding with one of these at speed would be catastrophic. To navigate this inverted mountain range, Nautilus was fitted with upward-looking sonar, or fathometers, to map the ice ceiling above them. They also had a new forward-looking sonar to detect obstacles in their path. Their first attempt, in June of 1958, ended in failure. As they approached the shallow, ice-clogged waters of the Bering Strait, they encountered massive ice keels, driving so deep that they couldn't find a safe passage. The space between the seabed and the ice ceiling was simply too small for the submarine to squeeze through. With great reluctance, Anderson was forced to turn back. It was a bitter disappointment, but it provided a crucial lesson. With new intelligence suggesting the ice had shifted, Anderson and his crew made a second attempt in late July. They left Pearl Harbor in absolute secrecy, telling the crew only that they were going on a special mission. On August 1, 1958, Nautilus dived beneath the ice pack near Point Barrow, Alaska. For the next 96 hours, they would be completely cut off from the world. This is the moment where the mission teetered on the brink of disaster. They were utterly alone, in uncharted territory, with the entire world's polar ice cap pressing down on them. Soon after diving, the ship's master gyrocompass failed, forcing them to rely on the backup. Then, the worst happened. The primary upward-looking fathometer, the sonar that was their eyes to see the deadly ice keels above, malfunctioned and died. They were running half-blind. Panic was not an option. Anderson and his navigation team fell back to the secondary sonar and pressed on deeper into the unknown. For 2 days, they navigated a deadly maze, their sonar operators calling out the depth of the ice above them in a calm, steady rhythm. Ice overhead, 60 feet, 80 feet, 150 feet. Every man on board knew that a single mistake, a single undetected mountain of ice, would mean a horrible, silent death. Trapped in a steel tomb at the top of the world. Chapter 5, 90 North. The tension in the control room was palpable. The inertial navigation system, their only reliable guide, was performing well but still required constant, meticulous care. The crew, aware of the immense danger, performed their duties with a focused, professional calm that bordered on the superhuman. They were pushing the very limits of exploration and technology. On the evening of August 3, 1958, the navigator made his final calculations. According to the inertial system, they were approaching their destination. Commander Anderson addressed the crew over the ship's intercom. "Stand by," he said, his voice steady. "In a few moments, history will be made. For the world, our country, and the Navy, the North Pole." At 11:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the instruments confirmed it. The USS Nautilus, with 116 men aboard, passed directly beneath the geographic North Pole. They were the first vessel, the first humans to ever reach the top of the world. There was no fanfare, no cheering. In the control room, there was a moment of profound, awed silence. They had done it. They had navigated the impossible labyrinth and conquered the last great wilderness on the planet. Commander Anderson allowed himself a small, private moment of reflection. He then gave the crew permission to celebrate, becoming 10-second tourists at the North Pole. A cake was cut, and the mood shifted from intense concentration to jubilant relief. But the mission wasn't over. They still had to navigate hundreds of more miles under the ice to reach the open waters of the Atlantic Ocean between Greenland and Iceland. The journey out was as perilous as the journey in, but with the primary objective achieved, the crew was filled with a new confidence. On August 5th, the Nautilus finally broke through the ice and surfaced, sending a simple, triumphant message to the Pentagon: Nautilus 90 North. The news electrified the world. President Eisenhower interrupted his vacation to announce the success to the nation. The mission had been so secret that the public had no idea it was even being attempted. The sudden news of this incredible American achievement was a massive boost to national pride, a powerful counterpunch to the Soviet Union's recent success in launching the Sputnik satellite. The Nautilus sailed to England and then to New York City, where the crew was given a hero's welcome with a ticker-tape parade through Manhattan. Commander Anderson and his men were flown to Washington, D.C., where President Eisenhower personally awarded the ship and crew the Presidential Unit Citation, the first ever awarded in peacetime. The USS Nautilus was no longer just a ship. It was a legend, a symbol of American ingenuity and daring. Chapter 6: The Nuclear Navy is Born. The success of Operation Sunshine was the capstone achievement of an already revolutionary career, but the Nautilus's work was far from over. It was now a frontline warship in the Cold War, and its very existence spurred a frantic new arms race beneath the waves. The Soviets, stunned by the North Pole transit, redoubled their efforts to build their own nuclear fleet, kicking off a decades-long, high-stakes game of cat-and-mouse in the deep ocean. Nautilus went on to serve for another 22 years. It was the centerpiece of naval exercises, testing and refining the very anti-submarine warfare tactics it had rendered obsolete. It demonstrated its endurance by participating in the naval blockade during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It hosted scientists and oceanographers, using its unique capabilities to explore the undersea world. It also suffered the indignities of a normal naval career. In 1966, it collided with the aircraft carrier USS Essex during an exercise, severely damaging its sail or conning tower. The reactor, protected deep within the pressure hull, was completely unharmed, a testament to Rickover's obsession with safety and robust design. But the most profound impact of the Nautilus was the fleet it created. The lessons learned from its design, construction, and operation were directly applied to the next generation of American submarines. The Skipjack class, which followed, combined nuclear power with a new, streamlined teardrop hull shape, creating the first truly modern high-speed submarine. Then came the George Washington class, which carried 16 Polaris nuclear missiles. The Nautilus had created the Hunter. Now its descendants became the ultimate deterrent. The nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, or boomer, could hide silently in the ocean depths for months, holding entire nations at risk, becoming the most critical and survivable leg of the nuclear triad. The entire strategic balance of the Cold War was built upon the foundation that Nautilus had laid. Rickover's impossible dream had become the world's terrifying reality. By the late 1970s, however, the pioneering ship was beginning to show its age. The early S-2W reactor, while groundbreaking, was also incredibly noisy by later standards. In the ultra-quiet world of submarine warfare, noise is death. Newer, far quieter, and more powerful submarines were joining the fleet. The Nautilus, the ship that had once been the most advanced weapon on the planet, was now technologically outmoded by its own children. Chapter 7: A Titan at Rest. On March 3, 1980, after 25 years of service and having traveled over 500,000 miles, a distance equivalent to circling the globe 20 times, the USS Nautilus was officially decommissioned at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. An era had come to an end. But the story of this historic ship was not over. Recognizing its immense significance, the Navy decided not to scrap it. Instead, Nautilus was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1982. It then undertook its final voyage, a long, slow tow from the West Coast through the Panama Canal and back home to Groton, Connecticut, to the very shipyard where it had been born. The process of turning a nuclear warship into a public museum was complex. The reactor compartment was permanently sealed, and the entire vessel underwent a thorough and careful preservation process. On April 11, 1986, the USS Nautilus opened to the public as the centerpiece of the Submarine Force Library and Museum. Today, she rests in the water she was launched into decades ago, a silent, black titan. Hundreds of thousands of visitors walk her decks and corridors each year, marveling at the cramped quarters and the maze of pipes and valves. They can stand in the control room where Commander Anderson gave the order to proceed under the ice, or walk through the crew's mess where a cake was cut in celebration at the top of the world. The ship is a monument, not just to a piece of technology, but to a moment in time when a group of determined individuals, led by a visionary but difficult genius, accomplished something that everyone else believed to be impossible. The Nautilus didn't just change naval warfare. It changed our relationship with the planet. It proved that no corner of the Earth was beyond human reach. It was the ultimate expression of technological mastery over nature for both good and ill. It was a weapon of war that also became a vessel of pure exploration. And it stands as a permanent reminder that sometimes the only thing standing between science fiction and reality is a single, audacious idea and the stubborn refusal to believe that it can't be done. It reminds us that every now and then, a single machine can come along that simply makes the old world and all its old rules disappear forever. We've told the story of a machine that shattered the known limits of its day. It conquered an environment once thought to be impenetrable, all because a few people refused to accept the word impossible. It makes you wonder, what are the polar ice caps of our own time? What technological, scientific, or personal barriers do we see as absolute, just waiting for a modern-day Nautilus to come along and prove them to be nothing more than a temporary obstacle on the way to a new frontier? Perhaps the most enduring lesson of this atomic submarine is that the most formidable barriers are often the ones we build in our own minds.